Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chats into the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing, or publishing in general, as we've found more and more. And today I am very delighted to introduce a guest who is actually a personal friend of mine, but you will get so much value out of listening to. He is Christine Angelis. He is an entertainment journalist, a comic book writer, an author, and also the man behind this fantastic thing called Monomythic. So, Christian, welcome to Fully Booked. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, well, we are delighted to have you here. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing great. Thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Christian. So yeah, I know you have a company called Monomythic, right? Monomythic.
Yeah.
Mouthful. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, Monomyth is sort of similar to the hero's journey, but I think there's probably maybe even more to it. It's a key part of a lot of writing in like fiction writing. So we wanted to have you on as sort of like the expert in this sort of on this sort of topic. So why don't you start us off by explaining Monomyth to us, and then maybe even about your company and why you started that and what you're doing, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, yeah. So I started Monomythic based off of Joseph Campbell's theories about the monomyth. He was a famous mythologist from a couple decades ago. I can't remember the exact time frame, but the idea of the monomyth was that essentially that all stories are just the same story, just different symbolic interpretations of sort of the same themes and recurring structures throughout the history of humanity. And I really like that because I came from a psychology background. So I studied Campbell around 2010, 2011, which is like around my ending years of college. And it's this idea that every story can kind of be broken down to like a 3-act structure, and there's different symbolic representations and certain turning points in every sort of foundational story structure. And you can see this from like everything from Star Wars to like most Hollywood and especially superhero epic films or comic books, especially. That there's a pattern here of kind of the hero's journey, and that's so foundational in Hollywood, but more importantly, it's foundational in stories. And when you start seeing that pattern, you kind of just see like a nice little guideline that helps you as a writer. And I like that so much that I named my company after it, because essentially I want my company to be known about stories, about the human experience, and not necessarily saying that it's all strictly just this particular structure, but showing that there is a recurring theme in humanity and that maybe we can learn from our patterns in history. So that's my thing with Monomythic and what I'm trying to do with the company.
And I was just going to say, like, you and I know each other. A few years ago, we met through a friend of a friend, and we were part of a writing group pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And we used to meet up every week and do writing exercises and talk about what we're working on. And one of us would present. And there was one particular week in which you presented. It was Dan Harmon's Story Circle, but basically you broke down how stories work. And there was a video with the example of The Dark Knight, how it breaks down into this 8-piece story circle. And I remember sitting there, and I was at that point, I thought I knew what I was doing. I was a writer. I'd just come off the back of like my second really successful novel. I'd sold like 30,000 copies of my books then. So I thought I knew what I was doing. And then I listened to you and I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Every single story kind of has this circular thing. And I thought back on the book I just published that had been really successful. And I think because I love stories and I love reading and stuff like that, I was intrinsically aware of what makes a satisfying story, but I hadn't like broken it down. And then I was like looking back and being like, the books of mine that had failed being the ones that kind of were a bit wibbly wobbly with the story circle, and the ones that succeeded were really tight to it. And so it really did. What you taught me like changed my understanding of writing fiction forever, turned me from a pantster into a plotter. It's made it such a more rewarding experience for me ever since. So I was so excited for you to come on, because I really do think that the way you break it down and like the way you explain it, just every single writer can learn from, even if you think you know what you're talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it means a lot to me that it impacted you this much because, again, I do think that it's so foundational in a lot of stories and what we do. And I think I mentioned it earlier. Like most screenplays these days in Hollywood, you see this in almost every movie these days. And more importantly, well, I guess not more importantly, but something that I do want to make distinct about how I approach Monomythic versus other writers is a lot of people see it as a guideline, and I do, but I genuinely do think that there's certain elements to it that I guess people kind of connect to on like a down to earth basis. Like I like the idea of the mentor, something that you take some sort of like knowledge or something that you kind of pull from, learn from kind of the loss of that, but then use it to kind of find the thing that you're always looking for. I do think there's like an innate nature in human desire and human consciousness to always aspire for a particular thing, but getting there was always sort of the journey. And I think the story circle and the hero's journey does a really good job of explaining why it is that we fall into these patterns. And it's in everything, as I mentioned. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's the way you taught it was kind of cool because you taught it. I know Joseph Campbell, I think, has 13 steps, but you taught a version with like 8 steps that was a circle.
Yep.
But the circle itself was broken into 4 quadrants, and the top half of the circle was order, and the bottom half was disorder. And it's like this,
Yeah.
And then left and right were truthful and untruthful. So whoever your character is starts off in the quadrant where everything is ordered, but it's ordered in an untruth. So he's part of the regime and doesn't know it, and then he falls in down the rabbit hole into Alice's Wonderland, which is I think it's untruthful disorder. And I don't know, the way it goes round, you can see the sense of each section of the story, and it's a theme behind it as well as the more tactical elements of what has to happen in all the bits.
Oh, 100%. And it's funny that you mentioned that because Dan Harmon's the one who created the idea of the circle element to it, where he broke it down so that there was a yin and yang to every element to it. And I thought that was really brilliant. But then I've taken even more classes since those days, and I've learned more about the story circle. I'm actually in a class with Batman writer Scott Snyder. And it's funny because I've learned how Scott teaches and like the things that he knows. And so much of it also, ironically, of course, falls to the monomyth and the hero's journey. And Scott's been an amazing mentor, and he's been showing the elements of how that circular nature, that duality, that yin-yang, push-pull, how it's all kind of like an emotional journey for your character, and that the circles in pretty much everything that you do in like terms of story. And obviously, yes, it's a guideline, and there's no strict, you have to hit this mark at this particular beat rule, but it's really cool to see sort of the totality. And the reason it's important is because it gives you a sense of the completion of the journey. You get to experience the bad, the good. You don't know a thing, you know a thing. Like there's an element to the wholeness, the fullness of it, and that creates the reader, the person engaging in the story, like a feeling of fulfillment by the time they leave and getting sort of a theme or a message taken away. And I think that's really key of what you should be looking at with a story circle. Not necessarily strict rules, but guidelines that make you feel whole by the end of it. I think that's the big takeaway from all of
I got that. There's the satisfaction you get, and a story has to have these elements and has to have like a moment of crisis at the end that it overcomes. And if you don't get that, what you watch isn't satisfying. Exactly. I just went out to see Guy Ritchie's new film, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which I loved because it was lots and lots of killing of Nazis, which I'm very much in approval of. But it didn't quite have that bit where the heroes thought they were going to be defeated. And as a result, it was kind of an unsatisfying movie. And I was sat there and I'm like, oh, yeah, I've got Christian's story circle here, and I can quite see that they're a bit soft on this particular point, and it would be so much more dramatic and impactful if they like bulk that up. And it's great being able to break down the story that way.
Oh, 100%. Thank you. Yeah, I do think that because it creates the duality nature, the need for fulfillment, it does drive a sense of the full journey. And really, if you ever do an epic story, so if you're doing a story that's so core to like mythology or world building, or like sort of like a journey of this person going from point A to point B, you kind of will always fall under the hero's journey, the story circle, even if you don't mean to, which is really fascinating to me. Now, I will say that there are stories that do break the circle entirely, and they just go really wibbly wobbly out there. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once was a really good example of that. But you don't see it that often. That's what I'm trying to say. Because if you're trying to do that, you're doing that intentionally. And a lot of the times too, stories where they're non-linear narratives, which you think that's not the story circle. If you take Pulp Fiction, I learned this from Scott. If you take Pulp Fiction, that also follows the story circle. It's just different segments at different times. So yeah.
You know, my son just did a summer course at Rutgers University with screenwriting, and we were
Nice.
talking about Pulp Fiction in particular, and about how Quentin Tarantino, like, he revolutionized cinema with like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, because it was putting the story non-linear. But you're right, at the end, you get almost double the satisfaction, because it doesn't have the beats of the story circle until you get to the end, and it all comes together, and it's like, oh, that's a great story. Oh, and I got the added reward of having watched it in an unusual way that subverted my expectations and surprised me and stuff.
Yeah, totally. And again, that's a huge reason people love Christopher Nolan films, because they love the mystery element. But a lot of the times what Nolan did in his early half of his career is just take the story circle and put it in different orders and such. But again, you still get the same fulfillment, you still get the same payoff. So it's just a really cool thing if you ever try using the story circle, because you see it everywhere, you know?
Now,
Yeah,
one of the things
when I think about the movie Everything All at Once, I remember coming out of that thinking I was confused. Like, I loved it, but it was so different, and it left me with a feeling of it when people asked me about it. I was like, it's a very different movie than what I was used to. And I think that was probably because it broke the story. It didn't have that sort of flow that I don't innately think about the way that you guys do. When I watch a show, I don't really think about the story circle. But when I come away with that feeling of something was different in this, I think it's probably that. It was like, it wasn't the story circle that I'm sort of used to, right? But it was still done well. So, I mean, you can do it. You can write a fulfilling story without that. But yeah, I think I get that idea that as a watcher or a reader, you come away feeling a different kind of feeling than if you had that sort of regular journey.
Well, Craig, I was going to say, we got together knowing about writing romance novels, and romance novels follow it's kind of a formula, the same thing. And there are lots of people who've sort of broken that down. There's a book called Romancing the Beats. But it's interesting when you think of, because I know you're a plotter rather than a pantster, when you plotted out your romance novels, did you find that they kind of followed almost a similar story structure as the Monomyth? Or
I never really thought about structures when I wrote, and I would write the story, and because I read so much, I think to me it was sort of innate. It's like, I know that this kind of thing would have to happen, and for it to be a good story but I never really thought of, I don't think I really even started reading about any of those structure things until later, when we started doing the blog and writing about them. And then I look back on some of that stuff. But in general, when I write, I plot it out so that everything makes sense, and there's different arcs and this and that. But I don't really think about, I need to make sure that the person does this at this point, and then they do that at that point. I think that, and I think that's true of probably of a lot of writers, right? But it's like Christian is saying, it's so innate in the stories that we tell, that if you're a storyteller, you're probably going to be hitting those beats without trying. And I think that's probably what it was.
Yeah. The thing that I think the circle helps with a lot is when you're trying to get the organization of your story, whenever you hit like kind of the writer's block, the wall, you can always nicely go back to the circle itself and be like, why is this missing a certain element? You can find exactly sort of what you're missing in sort of the completion of your hero's journey. It's another thing that I like a lot about it. But as I talk to, because Scott, again, my mentor at the moment, he has a very different take on hero's journey. He sees it less as this is how the story needs to be structured, and more of this is where your character needs to go on their journey. So it's more of a character arc for him than an overall story arc, which I've sort of just slowly been incorporating a little bit more in my own work. So.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I was just thinking, when romance books especially, they tend to be a lot more about the characters going through changing, having emotional journeys and developing emotionally, rather than what's physically going on around them. And so but I found exactly what you said. I was stuck in a novel for the longest time, for like a year, and I threw out 40,000 words of it, and then I sat down with the story circle and sort of broke it down and saw that, and it was really interesting to help you out of that hole, because when you break it down more and more, especially with the tactical beats of a romance novel. A romance novel is normally first person perspective, one chapter from the heroine's perspective, one chapter from the hero's perspective. They've got to meet at the end of the first chapter. They've got to break up by the third. And it's funny, you could lay those beats over a story circle beats, and then it almost becomes like you painting by numbers, because you start breaking it down like, oh, this has to happen, and 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 you write it down. And yeah, it's theoretically it's the end of writer's block. But it's all driven by character motivation. That's it. What you're saying about Scott saying it comes to the journey. And I think all good stories, they write themselves if you've got really good characters. If you have character A and character B, and they both have desires, their motivations, the thing they need, and that's going to bring them into conflict, that's a story.
Oh, 100%. And like a big reason that Scott's advice was really helpful for my journey was I started to realize that instead of forcing because one of the things that I struggle with the stories, or Campbell's story structure of monomythic storytelling, is there's always that need at the end to like escape back to kind of the status quo. But finding a way to write that organically it stopped feeling organic at a certain point in time. It's like, well, I need them to somehow get back to square one so that we can just be like, well, that was the journey. And it's like, well, sometimes a story doesn't need that. But when you start looking at more as a character arc, an emotional payoff of like, well, how did they emotionally get back to the center of who they were as a person from the beginning, then you start thinking of it in a very different way compared to like the traditional Campbell story structure. And when you start looking at it that way, as emotional journeys, as character developments, it's a little bit easier to even like use the Campbellian structure into your modern work, because it works a lot easier as a character journey than it does I need to hit this. I need the mentor to die right here or something like that. It's like, well, it doesn't have to be a mentor. It could just be a loss of something that was core to them, that taught them something that they no longer had, like the ability to use the Force in Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it's like, oh, okay, so that happened. But then where does he go by the end of it, and how does he find himself again? You know, when you start looking at it that way, it opens your eyes into like a new vision thing, which is why I do recommend always be learning and always try to find like new mentors and stuff. And Scott's been an amazing one for mine because he's really expanded my mind with what I could do with Story Circle. But yeah.
When you have to bring your heroes home, can't you just get some giant eagles to come in and take them home, like Tolkien did?
That's exactly the problem. Or if you're looking at the entire book, it's like, well, how do we get them back to the Shire? And the original, the not the original book, but the trilogy was like, we're gonna cut that section. It's like, yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that's the issue I had with it too when I started looking at the structures, is having that idea of having to force things along in a certain like, oh, this person has to do this at this point to follow that structure. And I think what you're saying is right. It's not necessarily about the plot itself following that. The people can follow that. They can have two different circles going on, and they'll meet in different parts, and like that sort of thing is where you realize that it's not necessarily a paint by numbers. There's lots of things you can do with it to still make sure that you're hitting those monolithic beats that everyone sort of needs in a story, without it being sort of cookie cutter and having to every book always sounding the same. I think that's one of the things people see when they see these the idea of story structures and stuff, and they think, oh, if I have to follow one of these, then like I'm like every other story, right? But there are ways to do it that you're not doing that, and the point of it is not to make every book the same. It's to show people that these are the elements that go into a fulfilling story.
100%. And to accentuate your point, a lot of modern movies, you're seeing it now more and more, the side characters are getting their own emotional story structure, their own hero's journey per se. Because it used to be like, all right, well, this is like a supporting character, we don't need to give them a payoff or whatever. But you're seeing more and more in television, especially, where it's like the side character is getting their own arc, they're getting their own hero's journey per se, getting sort of a thing they wanted, the conflicts of why they can't, and then sort of paying it off in the end. Nowadays, like movies and television that doesn't have fulfilling side character journeys are not acclaimed as much compared to that. But yeah.
I just watched the Snyder cut of the Justice League, and that was brilliant that way. Even the aeroplane had a character arc.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the point. Yeah. It's fascinating when you start seeing it everywhere. But yeah.
So can you sort of talk us through your the way that I know it was a whole presentation that you gave to Roland, but just for people to have an idea of that sort of 8-point circular structure without obviously we don't have multimedia or whatever your podcast, but if you sort of talk through those things so we can sort of see how it all works.
Yeah, sure. I normally have like slides and stuff, so I can
No,
remember.
we don't need
I'm gonna just try doing it off the top of my head, or at least how I generally see it.
Sure. Yeah.
It usually starts with the character, before who they were before, and an inciting incident. Almost everyone talks about the inciting incident, where something within you meet the character, you meet their everyday 9 to 5, the regular world, whatever you want to call it, and then an inciting incident happens, and it sort of changes their world enough so much that they have to sort of accept I believe it's called the call. Like they have to accept the call of the quest of what it is they need to fix or change. And there's a million examples of it in Star Wars. I guess I'll use it because it's the easiest one to structure. That's of course Luke learning about the Force and getting called to go on this quest to save Leia, I believe, right? Or when he meets the droids and essentially has to go on the call to whether or not he wants to do this. And of course he does, because he loses his family and he's like, well, I have nothing else, blah, blah, blah. Let me go follow you, crazy old man. And then usually the adventure happens. And if I remember, I'm trying to remember the exact dates, but I remember the adventure happens and there's usually a couple of quests of like ABC. Can you attain this particular element or keys that you need to get the thing that you wanted. And I know that Campbell has a particular structure for it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And that's sort of the fun part of the story too, because that's sort of when you see the hero becoming the thing that they need to be. That usually leads to the midpoint where the gift of the goddess, I believe is what Campbell calls it. And that's usually where the hero gets the thing that they want, and sort of triumphs, in the case of Star Wars, I believe it's when they finally get to Leia and are able to rescue her, and boom, it's like, all right, well, now we fully embrace this new identity. We're going to go on the quest and try to get her out. Usually after you get the thing that you get, the element of the thing that you're looking for, it comes at a cost. I can't remember the exact name for it, but it's usually like a lesson of, okay, now you have this gift, but at what price did you pay for it? And then it sort of leads to I think I'm missing a beat, but it usually leads to something, and then the all hope is lost moment where you think that everything you wanted was there, but unfortunately it came at a cost. And then usually this is around the point where the mentor, whatever it is that taught you how to do these things, gets lost, or something changes along the way. And I believe after that is like a final confrontation of some sorts, like Dark Night of the Soul, I think is what's called, and Save the Cat. I can't remember the exact term, but then after that, you do the final confrontation using all the knowledge and skills that you developed and such, and then you sort of get the final escape, and that leads you back to the beginning of the journey, having gone from absolutely different to picking up and going through the trials to getting the thing that you looked for, it coming at a cost, and then sort of the dark thing before the soul, and then coming back full circle to who you were status quo, but different and changed because you learned all these new skills. Obviously, there's different ways to look at it from emotionality. There's different ways to look at it from story structure, but that's kind of the key gist of it. And that's just me spinning it out, having not looked at this in like a year. But yeah, so.
That was pretty good, having just like spat that out.
Yeah, thank you. I try. It's been a while since I really looked at the story circle Monomythic strictly, but yeah.
Yeah, when you think about Star Wars specifically, it's much more obvious, I think, than other stories. I know it fits with a lot of other stories, but I think sometimes you have to maybe dig a little bit to find those elements because they're not as obvious as Lucas did. Yeah,
Lucas did it very cookie cutter, and it's the perfect example for it. But like Scott likes using Titanic a lot. Titanic uses the same structure, and then stories that you wouldn't think do it. A lot of the times what they do is a lot of those beats will kind of just hit the same exact moment. Like I can see kind of the final confrontation / returning back to the present kind of being one similar scene, but still have the same emotional payoff. Obviously, I'm not going to be good at just spinning it off the top of my head because I'm very tired at the moment. But yeah, there are different ways to look at it. But if you look at it as emotional journey arc, it does fit a lot better than strictly following the story rules. But the truth is, at the end of the day, these are all just tools to help you be the writer that you want to be. Like that's kind of the key thing to look at it. Because I also know writers who completely say, "Bah, screw the story circle. I'm gonna do my own thing," and it comes off as disconnected and a little bit messy sometimes when you really try to go against it. Like I've seen people intentionally go, "I'm going to do everything that this isn't," and it's like, well, what is going on? And yeah, so again, it's a good way of looking at the world. But yeah.
Now, I thought it was interesting what you were saying about Hollywood movies recently. I kind of blame Save the Cat. Like I read Save the Cat, and suddenly I noticed every single Hollywood movie was Save the Cat. I was watching Frozen 2 with my daughter, and I was telling her ahead of time what was going to happen because it was so predictable. And it's like it's. I think having a story circle and a structure is great, but it can get too much and become just rote.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like and especially in kids fiction, like in kids fiction, they really want the structure because the kids want a wholehearted, full, complete journey. So and that kind of stuff, yeah, you absolutely see it in most kids movies.
I'm thinking about Titanic. So how do they end up back at the beginning in Titanic? Because they kind of.
I believe it's to be honest, Scott.
Oh, it's just Rose, I guess. Rose.
It's Rose's journey, really. If you look at it from her side, then it is a full story circle. But Scott, if you just YouTube it, I'm sure Scott did a lecture. He talks about it all the time. His main example.
That's true. I guess from her perspective, not from Jack's, I guess. But
no, Jack is. Yeah, my journey is in the bottom of the ocean.
So do you teach this stuff? What is your company, Monomythic? What does it do? Is it a publishing sort of company, or are you teaching this? Or
Monomythic is my LLC for publishing works, and it's basically where I publish most of my fiction and my nonfiction soon to come as well. But the reason I call it Monomythic is, and it's a little bit Monomyth related, a little bit more contemporary related, is I believe in stories. I believe in the universality of stories. I think that everything we do is sort of circled around the idea of story structure, and how we look at the world. And I see what's happening in today's society, and I do think that there are a lot of problems. I do think that somehow we've lost the narrative, and we're kind of driven by forces outside of us. And so my goal with Monomythic is to tell stories that matter, that talk about the current times. And a lot of fiction and publishing right now don't want to touch on certain topics because it's too rough to address. And the goal of Monomythic was to see if I could take the story structure, the lens of what I know to be modern storytelling as a classic, and sort of put a modern lens on it. So like Brave New Girls is a book that I did a short story on. It's like a 5,500 word piece in this anthology. But I wrote a story about this young girl who's I think around 14, and she creates an AI that's objective is sort of to replace specialized labor. We've entered a weird reality where essentially AI has replaced almost everyone, and everyone's sort of suffering to some extent. There are not enough jobs, and the world's suffering, but we're all undergoing the Great Distraction and such. But she creates an AI that, because she's a super genius, she creates an AI that's supposed to replace specialized labor, but in doing so doesn't, and accidentally sort of creates something that ends capitalism and the world as we know it. It's not as dark as it sounds, but the idea that I wanted to make with this was, can I do a story that was hero's journey with this is where we are at the beginning, where do we go at the end? Buy the book if you really want to find out. But more importantly, talk about modern times. And for that one, it was very much, artificial intelligence. And my first comic debut was very much about beauty influencer culture. Can I do the story structure in 8 pages in a comic book format and make a powerful impact about influencer culture and its toxicity, and how some of these people that we consider celebrities are just really in it to push their own celebritydom, their own fame, and make money off people and profit off of it without caring about the other person. It's not really about trying to influence culture in a good way. It's really just about them and their worship as a celebrity, idolatry, blah blah blah. The point is again, everything that I'm publishing, everything that I'm working on as a writer, I've made it a goal to use the monomyth to basically try to tell a good story that feels rounded, but always talk about contemporary issues, whether it's social media and the toxicity behind it, or AI, obviously. Yeah, that's sort of it. Is like I wanted to show that A, I know story structure, but also B, address some of these hard-hitting issues. So, yeah.
I find that fascinating what you said about how people don't want to talk or don't want to do certain story elements because they're scared about it. I was thinking with Disney, two of the live action Disney films, there was Mulan, and I loved Mulan. It's my favorite animated movie, and part of it is the fact that Mulan is a girl, and yet she manages to use her brain and other things in order to be able to compete as well as a guy, and then prove herself to be better than a guy and a savior of China, and reveals herself to be a girl. So there's a lesson there, a really important thing. Like, okay, you're a girl, but you are just as important and can do just as much as a guy. Whereas in the live action movie, they got rid of that completely, and ever since she was a child, she was blessed with mana or chi. And to me, it just removed all of every single thing that was important and taught you something in Mulan. They got rid of.
Yes.
And it's the same in Pinocchio. They did a live action version of Pinocchio, and in the original, Pinocchio was drinking and turned into a donkey, and they kind of got rid of that as well. And it's like these days they're so worried about their heroes having to be held accountable for doing something wrong that they've ignored the fact that doing something wrong is the basis of everything that makes a good story.
100%. And that's kind of why I'm trying to write the way that I am, is literally just because, like, I work in entertainment media, and I know why we don't cover these topics. But if I'm gonna take a shot at this, I want to be known as the writer who who's like, all right, I know my story structure, but more importantly, I can talk about an issue about today. Because like I see so many people avoid. I have to be careful with my words. I see certain companies and certain people avoid touching on these hard-hitting issues because they know that if they do, they might lose revenue, they might lose money because of corporate interest and things that you just don't say because of public. And I get it to some extent, but I do think we're missing the mark on certain things. And for me, like AI, for that story, AI was a very big one, because I'm like, look, this thing's replacing everyone, and I know where direction this is heading. Well, what if we threw a weird twist where I kind of replace something that everyone would find really funny and also fascinating, and changes how we view capitalism as we know it? Again, buy the book Brave New Girls. It's the latest issue out. That just came out like 2 weeks ago. And I'll have a link or something on my social medias too. But the idea again was, can we talk about modern issues while still keeping it within the circle and the sort of fulfillment of the universality of stories? That's sort of what I'm doing with Monomythic. And I know it's a hard pitch, but when you start reading it, you'll start seeing it's like, oh, okay.
It sounds so important to me, because we live in times when things are being censored to this absurd degree, and it's like it is almost we don't want to talk about anything that makes us feel uncomfortable, and yet the things that make us feel uncomfortable go on behind the scenes. We're just not allowed to talk about them. And that seems like the least healthy society to live in. And our job as artists, as creators, even if we write romance novels, we say something real in them. And like you're able to talk about topics. And, I got my last romance novel. Some of my fans came back and were like, it was very suicide-y. And I'm like, yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that a lot of veterans commit suicide and stuff like that. Because if you don't talk about these things, then what's the point of art? What are we doing? We're just distracting people rather than like doing what the core purpose of art is, whatever that art may be.
No, thank you. And that I think that's amazing, because that's 100% what I'm trying to talk about here. Yeah, like that is an important topic to hit, and we need to talk about these things. And stories were for the longest time the safe haven to do that. And in the past couple of decades, for a lot of different reasons, I'm not blaming one particular group or what happened in general, but like for a lot of reasons, culture entered this weird phase where we're preventing ourselves from talking about certain things, but fiction is really the place to explore these ideas, these cultural revolutions, and then play around with it to just get inspired to how we can change modern society, the world. That's a big reason why I became a writer. And I think a lot of people do this, but nowadays you see a lot of, I don't want to put names, but there's a lot of people who are doing it simply because they know that they want to be famous. They know that it's a certain avenue to get this XYZ done, and they want to be known for that. But I'm very opposite of that. It's like, I don't really super care if I'm super famous. I just want to make sure a good story is told that maybe makes a difference. And I think that's what we need more now, like writers like that. Not necessarily saying it's got to be me, but people like that who are trying to write to inspire change, because we really do need some change right now. And I think coming at full circle, Monomyth is a great way to do that, because you can see how universally we've always created stories about change. It's just different ways of how it changed over time. which is why studying the story circle I think is really cool, because seeing how Star Wars did it versus how we use it now, you can learn a lot from that and it makes you a better writer. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say what a lot of people are going on this phrase woke, and this TV show's woke, that TV show's woke, and I've found it's kind of it's less about. I mean, I think all art is inherently woke. Like all art is somebody trying to tell their side of things, and the problem is, I think a lot of what people call a woke now are stories that are trying to push an agenda without them actually having a story circle around there, so they seem inauthentic. To me, woke is not about whatever it is that you're standing up for. It's telling it in a way that is inauthentic and doesn't resonate with people. Whereas if you follow the beats of a story, whatever you're saying, whatever thing you want to say, and quote unquote agenda, it resonates with people because it's in the form of a story, and that's what art is. All art should push boundaries. And
no, 100%, I agree with that. I do think that that's important too, and it's great that you said the word woke, because I think that a lot of people misconstrue their ideals of what they don't like about woke culture as to blame why a story doesn't work. But a lot of the times, if something's not working, it's because there's something wrong with the story. It has nothing to do with an agenda versus, it just didn't fully resonate as a story. I'll use this as an example because I don't think they're going to care. I wasn't a fan of Rey in the last Star Wars trilogy because I really don't like where they kind of lost their way midway through it. Of, is she the chosen one? Is it not? Does it matter if you're a Jedi genetically or not? A lot of that felt a little bit unearned too at certain sections of like her Force abilities, and I do think that was an example of poor storytelling. But was it because it was a girl or a relationship with Finn? Did that not happen because he was black? I don't know. I don't want to push a go woke, go broke thing, because I think that's stupid. But it's more of the story just wasn't working because it fell apart midway through. And I know a lot of it has to do with also corporate interests and certain focus groups and such, but it just didn't work, man. And I think everybody can universally agree that the last trilogy was kind of bad, but yeah, sorry, Disney.
Oh, well, no, I was going to say the Acolyte is an interesting one. People are losing their shit over the Acolyte, and I don't have any problem with any of the quote unquote woke stuff. I like lesbian space witches. I'm a Doctor Who fan. We're used to those for donkey's years. It wasn't a well constructed story, and it had flaws. And so you could not like something without necessarily not liking what it stands for or what it's trying to say. It's like you can say something can be objectively bad without rejecting what it's trying to do, and also you can acknowledge what it does well.
Oh, 100%, yeah, all the way.
Yeah, I think in this culture too, I think one of the things that I think that has come about in the last, I don't know, decade, is the idea that more people have a voice, right? More people are able to express their opinions and have them heard and known, not just as artists, but as the consumers of the art, right? So the people can come on and, with the internet, with online forums, with reviews, with whatever, people have more of a voice than ever to say what they think about something. The problem, I think, has become when, the argument was like, well, we don't have a voice, we can't say our opinion of it. And so now that's fixed, but it's sort of pushed a little bit past that now, where it's like, because I have an opinion, you have to care about that opinion and change it. And so like Roland and I have run into this with the site in the past, where we write an article about something and all of a sudden we start getting all this hate stuff about, not because of what we wrote, but because of we covered a topic that people don't think should be covered because of this person's political agenda or this and that, right? And then they put the pressure on us to remove it because it's not fair that we're giving a voice to this person that they don't think should have a voice. And it's like, well, I don't know, like, I mean, it's like a lot of people like that person, a lot of people don't, and it's okay if you don't, and it's okay if you do. But the fact is like, should you, because you don't, be putting pressure on us to remove it because you don't think that it should be heard? So it's pushing the other way, and that's what I think is sort of where we've lost our balance a little bit. The people that didn't have a voice before, now that they have one, they're almost trying to make up for lost time when they didn't have one and force it, and it's basically doing the same thing what was done to them before. So that's the unfortunate thing that has come about it. But that's what happens, is society will find their balance at some point.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, it comes back to the universality of stories, where the culture will change. Like the things that are popular, the things that offend people, obviously changes every 5 to 10 years, and the direction that the market goes. You could be a best-selling author of a particular genre in 1 year, and then all of a sudden it just falls out of fashion. The idea, though, is to really just be focused on the quality of the story, talk about the story itself, and especially if it's something that matters to you, which I think if you're a writer, you're going to be writing about stuff that matters to you, obviously. So what it should be about is about the story and about connecting to that human element, the universality of it, versus any particular moment in time or agenda. The best stories are timeless. You don't have to, have them focused on a particular moment. It just feels like something that could relate to even today, and I think that's what culture should be focusing on more than any particular, us versus them hatred and stuff. But I get why that also happens too, because coming from the entertainment journalism side, hate generates clicks and that generates revenue, but that's also, unfortunately, like you lose the discourse, the discussion along the way. And I think the times have to change as a result, which is again why I'm trying to make Monomythic what it is, because I'm trying to make stuff here that matters and talks about some of these issues, even including this, which is why some of my next stuff, I don't know if it'll offend people or they'll be happy about it, but I'm gonna try writing it anyway because I think the conversation needs to be had. So yeah.
Well, maybe if you're not offending people, you're not doing it right.
That too. Yeah, you're always gonna offend somebody.
Well, we are nearly coming up to the top of the hour. But I was going to say, Christian, can you tell everyone where they can find out more about Monomythic, where they can find out more about all of the columns that you write, your comic book? You just were at I can't remember which con last weekend, but you sold a bunch of copies, didn't you?
Oh yeah, Garden State Comic Fest. Yeah. Me and Jad and Mark sold 55 copies of the Team of Balbrith Volume 2, which is really dope. That's actually a lot for a comic convention. I didn't know that until now. And then on top of that, I have a short story in Brave New Girls, which I talked about earlier. That's an anthology that's done yearly. Every book that's sold goes to women in STEM to help basically get more women in engineering and sciences, which is really dope. You can find Brave New Girls on Amazon, and you can find Team of Balbrith at conventions that we do, but I think the Kickstarter is also still open if you want to get a copy through there. And then you can find everything about Monomythic and myself as a creative on christianangelis.com. I am updating it though at the moment, but christianangelis.com, that's going to be where a majority of it is, where I talk about my writing and try to pitch things. And yeah, Monomythic will be my publishing LLC where you'll see all my works and stuff. But yeah, that's the gist of it. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, we'll put a link down below, so please scroll down there and go and check out Christian's stuff. While you're down there, you'll pass that big, long, empty comment section. So why don't you leave Christian a comment and let him know how much you appreciated everything he shared with us today? Because I know I did. I'm a big fan of Christian's. While you're down there, there's also that subscribe button. If you haven't hit that, double tap it for luck. And there's also a little bell icon. Oh, there's a like. There are so many things that you can do. So please get busy clicking, and we will be back next week with a brand new episode of Fully Booked. So until then, thank you, Christian, and we'll speak to you soon.